In recent days, hundreds of thousands of Americans have taken to the streets in protests held across all 50 states.
Trump is a traitor. He's betrayed this country. He's betrayed our government, and he's betrayed our people. He's betrayed our allies. He sold us out. He's a criminal. Get him out.
Hands off means restore what we've had as a democracy. And so it's being touched in the most dangerous ways. In fact, when we were making our poster,
today at a crossroads of history where tyranny and corruption tighten their grip, and we are left with a choice: to rise up or to surrender to a corrupt regime hell-bent on remaking America in its image.
This is our country!
In roughly 60 days, we have seen our rights to free speech and protest trampled.
These mass gatherings represent an outpouring of public anger directed at President Donald Trump's trade tariffs and the sweeping political reordering initiated by his administration. Organized under the banner of Hands Off, the demonstrators have united an array of groups, from economic critics and civil rights advocates to climate activists, all demanding a halt to what they see as a radical shakeup of U.S. politics. The tone of the protests is clear. Citizens feel that their voices are being sidelined, while policies with far-reaching global and domestic implications are implemented without adequate dialogue. The catalyst of discontent, protesters have pinpointed several issues at the heart of their grievances. One of the primary triggers is the imposition of aggressive tariffs that critics argue could ultimately harm the U.S. economy by hiking prices on essential goods. While the Trump administration promised lower inflation and improved everyday affordability during the campaign, the current trade policies have instead sparked fears of a higher cost of living. Demonstrators are not only challenging the economic rationale behind these tariffs, they are also expressing deep concerns regarding the broader authoritarian tendencies they perceive in Trump's consolidation of power, which they claim undermines democratic principles. Voices from the ground across the nation, diverse voices are speaking out. In cities as large and iconic as New York, protesters have taken to areas like Fifth Avenue, conveying a striking mix of frustration and urgency. One attendee passionately lamented the state of affairs, comparing the current administration's priorities, such as focusing on what they perceive as niche issues, to ignoring the economic struggles of everyday citizens. Similar scenes unfolded in Charlotte, North Carolina, where an individual with a disability stood up on behalf of the over 70 million Americans who depend on Medicaid or Medicare. From Houston, Texas, where demonstrators defied even severe weather warnings, to the hallowed grounds of Washington, D.C., the protesters have showcased an impressive level of resilience, uniting people from different walks of life under the common call for the protection of their democratic rights. A national and global impact, the protests, organized as a one-day event on April 5th, turned out to be the largest single day of dissent since President Trump's return to office earlier this year. Yet beyond the immediate impact on U.S. soil, there is also a noteworthy ripple effect abroad. American expatriates and democratically inclined citizens across European capitals, such as Berlin, Paris, and London, have echoed similar sentiments, signaling that the influence of American political decisions extends far beyond its borders. While these international demonstrations are largely driven by U.S. citizens living abroad, their presence underscores a growing concern over the global economic instability triggered by the current tariff policies, a situation that experts fear may leave the global market in an increasingly precarious position. Expert perspectives and in-depth analysis. Political analysts and media commentators have been weighing in on the potential long-term consequences of the current protest wave. For instance, William Glucraftoft, a U.S. analyst and the deputy editor of a respected political magazine, points out that while today's protests might be seen as a cathartic, one-off event, they carry the seeds of a larger, more sustained movement. Glucraftoft draws parallels with the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, noting that even if today's actions are momentary, they reflect decades of frustration and growing public dissatisfaction with policies perceived as out of touch with the real needs of the people. Importantly, these protests are not only aimed at President Trump, but also at an array of political figures and institutional practices across the board, indicating a broader cultural and political crisis. Criticism of economic policy and political messaging. A major focal point in the protest narratives is the stark contrast between the promises made during electoral campaigns and the reality of implementing those policies. One of Trump's central campaign pledges was to lower prices and curb inflation. However, the imposition of new tariffs appears to be leading to the opposite effect: higher costs for consumers. In public statements, Trump has even urged Americans to hang tough in the face of the rising cost of living, suggesting that enduring short-term pain is necessary for long-term gain. Critics, however, argue that this line of reasoning is not only economically flawed, but also dangerously dismissive of the genuine hardships experienced by millions of households. They contend that the current administration's approach represents yet another instance of political doublespeak, where reassuring rhetoric obscures policies with potentially devastating economic impacts. The broader implications for democracy. Beyond immediate economic consequences, the protesters are deeply worried about the broader implications these policies have on the fabric of American democracy. Many see the current wave of tariffs and other initiatives as emblematic of a trend toward consolidating power in the executive branch, potentially at the expense of civil liberties and democratic norms. Organized groups have repeatedly declared that this is not a product of Donald Trump alone, but rather a manifestation of decades-long political strategies employed by both Republican and Democratic parties. They argue that a fundamental realignment is needed, one that moves away from entrenched policies that favor elites and instead prioritizes the interests and rights of ordinary citizens. The protests are thus as much about economic justice as they are about reclaiming what many believe has been eroded in modern U.S. politics: the promise of true democracy. International reactions and comparative context. While the protesters in the U.S. are clearly vocal about the domestic implications of current economic policies, international voices have also chimed in. Across Europe, discussions have turned to instances where democratic backsliding is apparent, such as in Hungary, and debates over political asylum policies in Germany. These international comparisons highlight that the struggle over democratic governance is not confined to America. Even as the focus in the U.S. is on national tariffs and economic strategy, questions are being raised about the broader international implications of such policies and whether they might signal a new era of political and economic orthodoxy that prioritizes unilateral decision-making over multilateral cooperation. The role of political opposition and public sentiment. One of the most intriguing aspects of this protest wave is the reaction, or lack thereof, from Trump's own party. Traditionally, one might expect a clear rebuttal from the political base, yet many right-leaning constituents seem caught in a complex situation. There is an emerging debate about whether the apparent discontent could lead to a broader reevaluation of support for policies that were once considered a necessary corrective to economic shortcomings. Some suggest that, if consumer prices continue to climb and economic pressure mounts, even those who previously backed Trump might begin to question the wisdom of these new policies. Critics argue that this could force both parties to reconsider their long-term strategies and potentially open up space for alternative visions of economic governance that are more directly aligned with the everyday needs of Americans. Looking ahead, the uncertain future. As the protesters continue to hold the administration accountable, one of the critical questions remains: will the pressure from these sustained actions provoke meaningful change? At this stage, many analysts, including several political commentators and social scientists, believe that today's large-scale demonstrations could serve as the catalyst for ongoing mobilization. However, there is also uncertainty about whether the mobilization will be enough to overcome entrenched political interests. The protesters' demand for hands off our democracy could potentially shape future political debates, drive new policy initiatives, and even influence upcoming elections. For now, the administration has largely maintained a defiant posture, urging Americans to accept short-term sacrifices for a better future, a stance that continues to be hotly contested both in political circles and in the living rooms of ordinary citizens. Concluding thoughts and reflection. In conclusion, the recent protests mark a pivotal moment in American politics. They are not simply isolated events, but represent a convergence of long-standing grievances about economic inequity, declining civil rights, and a perceived departure from democratic values. The demonstrators' unified message, whether delivered from bustling urban centers or quiet suburban streets, is a clear call for a new political direction that respects both economic realities and democratic norms. As the nation grapples with these challenges, the coming months will be critical. The responses from both the White House and Congress, alongside shifts in public opinion, will reveal whether this wave of protest will spark substantive change or fade into the background as another moment of cathartic expression. For now, the actions of these citizens underscore a broader narrative. Democracy is not a fixed state, but an ongoing project that demands active participation and vigilance by all its members.